The chill of betrayal is a cold you never forget. For 10 years, one woman poured her soul into building her husband's empire, only to be cast aside for a younger model like a forgotten antique. He thought he had erased her, burying her memory under layers of wealth and public adoration for his new love. Tonight, at the most prestigious charity gala of the year, he stands on stage, his arm around his prize, ready to toast his perfect life. But he made one fatal miscalculation. He forgot that a woman with nothing left to lose has everything to gain. In moments, the grand ballroom doors will swing open and a whisper will turn into a roar, proving that the best revenge isn't loud and ugly, it's brilliant, beautiful, and walking in on the arm of royalty. Amelia Vance once believed her life was a testament to a partnership forged in love and ambition. She had met Richard Sterling in college, a man with a blueprint for a dynasty in his eyes and a fire in his belly. She was an art history major, with a brilliant eye for aesthetics and a quiet, steadfast strength. While Richard was the architect of Sterling Enterprises, Amelia was its silent, indispensable interior designer. She was the one who smoothed over ruffled feathers with investors who chose the art for his new corporate headquarters to project an image of old-world stability, who hosted flawless dinners that turned skeptical clients into loyal partners. She sacrificed her own burgeoning career as an art consultant, pouring every ounce of her creativity and emotional labor into the foundation of his success. Their home, a sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park, was her masterpiece, a space that whispered of power and taste, not shouted it. Every piece of furniture, every painting, every carefully curated object was a reflection of the life she thought they were building together. It was a beautiful cage, and for a decade she had been its willing, happy occupant. The first crack in the gilded facade appeared not as a dramatic fissure, but as a subtle, chilling draft. It was the scent of a different perfume, something cloyingly sweet and juvenile clinging to his suits. It was the late-night board meetings that became more frequent, the phone calls taken in hushed tones on the terrace. Richard, as her confidant, became a polite, distant stranger who shared her bed, but not her life. He began to critique her, his words like tiny, sharp pebbles thrown against the stained glass of her confidence. Her classic, elegant style was suddenly dated. Her thoughtful opinions on his business were uninformed. Her very presence, once his anchor, seemed to be an annoyance. The truth, when it came, was not delivered with kindness or remorse. It was brutal and public. A gossip website, known for its merciless exposés of the city's elite, published a series of photographs. There was Richard, his arm wrapped possessively around a woman half his age, her hair a cascade of artificial blonde, her smile a predatory gleam. Her name was Crystal Monroe, an aspiring model whose only notable asset seemed to be her unabashed ambition. They were pictured laughing on a yacht in St. Bart's, kissing outside a Michelin-starred restaurant in Paris, and shopping on Rodeo Drive. The dates of the photos spanned the last 18 months. When Amelia confronted him, the glossy magazine prints spread across their marble coffee table like pieces of a shattered life. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He looked relieved. "Oh, thank God," he'd said, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. "I was wondering how to bring this up. It's better this way. Cleaner. Cleaner." The word echoed in the vast, silent apartment. He spoke of ending their 15-year relationship, 10 years of marriage, as if it were a business transaction, a portfolio to be liquidated. "I need someone who complements my current lifestyle, Amelia," he explained, his voice devoid of emotion. "Crystal understands the new direction of my brand. She's vibrant. She's relevant." The implication was clear. Amelia was irrelevant. She was the starter wife, the beta version of the woman he needed, now that he was Richard Sterling, the titan of industry, and not just Rich Sterling, the dreamer she'd married. The divorce was a masterclass in cruelty. His legal team, a pack of sharks in $1,000 suits, painted her as a grasping, resentful woman, demanding an unreasonable share of his empire. They argued that her contributions were non-monetary, the duties of a wife, and therefore held little value. They dissected her life, her sacrifices, and presented them as a comfortable existence for which she should be grateful. Richard, the man she had propped up, stood by and let them tear her down. He wanted not just to divorce her, but to humiliate her, to erase her from the story of his success, so he could insert Crystal as his rightful queen. He won for the most part. He had the better lawyers, the deeper pockets, and the more ruthless spirit. Amelia was left with a settlement that was a pittance compared to the fortune she had helped build, and the sprawling penthouse was stripped of her touch, sold to make way for a new, flashier monument to Richard's ego. The last time she saw him, he was directing movers out of their home. "Try to build a life for yourself, Amelia," he'd said, a smirk playing on his lips. "It's what independent women do, isn't it?" It wasn't advice, it was a exercise. He wanted her to fail to fade into obscurity, a forgotten footnote in his glorious biography. As she walked away from the life she knew with only her personal belongings and a broken heart, she felt a cold, desolate emptiness. Richard hadn't just left her, he had tried to annihilate her. The first 6 months after the divorce were a grey, formless blur. Amelia moved into a modest but tasteful apartment on the Upper West Side, a world away from the opulent splendor she had once known. The silence was the loudest thing in the room. There were no staff bustling about, no ringing phones with news of another deal closed, no echo of Richard's booming voice. There was only the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic, hollow beat of her own heart. Her friends, loyal and well-meaning, tried to pull her from the wreckage. Her best friend, Sophia, a sharp-witted gallery owner with a no-nonsense attitude, was a constant presence. She would arrive with containers of takeout bottles of expensive wine and a determination to not let Amelia drown in her sorrow. "He's a monster, Ames," Sophia would say, perched on the edge of the sofa, while Amelia stared blankly at the wall. "A narcissistic black hole in a bespoke suit. He didn't just leave you, he tried to unmake you. Don't let him." But Amelia felt unmade. Her identity had been so inextricably linked with Richard's that she no longer knew who she was without him. She was Mrs. Sterling, the gracious hostess, the silent partner, the woman behind the man. Who was Amelia Vance? She could barely remember the ambitious young woman who had once dreamed of running her own art advisory firm, who could lose herself for hours in the brushstrokes of a sergeant or the bold lines of a Calder. That woman felt like a ghost. The gossip columns were a constant source of fresh pain. Richard was flaunting his new life with a vengeance. He and Crystal were society's new darlings, or at least they were forcing themselves into that position with sheer financial brute force. There were pictures of them at every premiere, every fundraiser, every exclusive event. Crystal, draped in diamonds that Amelia knew were paid for from accounts she had helped build, would be clinging to his arm, her expression a practiced mix of adoration and entitlement. The captions would gush about Richard's newfound happiness and his stunning new partner. Amelia was never mentioned. It was as if she had never existed. Richard's cruelty extended beyond the press. He made sure the world she once inhabited closed its doors to her. Invitations to social events dried up. Friends they had shared as a couple suddenly became too busy for lunch. She was a pariah, a reminder of a past Richard was determined to rewrite. He was poisoning the well, ensuring she remained isolated and broken. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Amelia hit her nadir. She was sorting through a box of old keepsakes when she found a framed photo from early in their marriage. They were standing in front of their first major acquisition for Sterling Enterprises, a small, dilapidated warehouse on the Hudson that Richard had grand plans for. In the photo, they were young, hopeful, and holding hands. She remembered the day vividly. She had spent weeks creating the design proposal, that had ultimately won over the skeptical zoning board. Looking at the photo, a wave of such profound grief and rage washed over her that she couldn't breathe. She hurled the frame against the wall, and the sound of shattering glass was a perfect echo of the sound her life had made. She slid down the wall and finally truly wept. She cried for the woman she had been, for the love she had believed in, for the years she had lost. She cried until her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen shut. And in the exhausted, hollowed-out silence that followed, a tiny, unfamiliar spark ignited. It was anger. Not the helpless, wounded anger she had felt before, but a clean, cold, clarifying rage. He would not win. He would not erase her. He had taken her past, but he would not be allowed to steal her future. The next morning, Amelia woke up with a purpose she hadn't felt in a year. She showered, put on a simple but elegant dress, and walked out of her apartment. She went to the bank and took a significant portion of her settlement to lease a small, overlooked commercial space in Chelsea, the heart of the city's art district. It was a gamble, a terrifying leap into the unknown. But as she stood in the dusty, empty room, with its high ceilings and peeling paint, she didn't see ruin. She saw a blank canvas. She would rebuild her life not with steel and glass, like Richard, but with beauty, history, and something that was entirely her own. She would call her new venture Vance Curations. Her name, not his. Transforming the dusty Chelsea space into Vance Curations became Amelia's salvation. She poured every waking hour into it, her grief and anger channeled into sanding floors, patching plaster, and designing the perfect lighting to showcase art. The work was physically demanding and mentally all-consuming, leaving no room for her to dwell on the past. Sophia marshaled her contacts, bringing in contractors who worked for reasonable rates and artists who were eager for a new passionate voice to represent them. Amelia decided her niche would be what she knew and loved best, not just selling art, but curating legacies. She specialized in art advisory and provenance research, helping new collectors build meaningful collections and established families manage their artistic estates. It was a quieter corner of the art world, one that valued intellect and integrity over flash and glamour. It was everything Richard's world was not. Her first few months were a struggle. The sterling name, once a key that opened any door, was now a liability. Some potential clients still in Richard's orbit treated her with a condescending pity that was worse than outright scorn. But Amelia persisted. Her knowledge was undeniable, and her passion was infectious. She secured a small but significant contract to advise on the art portfolio for a boutique hotel, and her tasteful, intelligent choices earned a mention in a prestigious design magazine. It was a small victory, but it was hers. The day that changed everything began like any other. Amelia was meticulously researching the history of a minor 18th century portrait she believed was misattributed. An appointment was scheduled in her calendar under the name A. Windsor, a representative for a private European collector. She assumed it was an assistant or a junior associate. At precisely 2 p.m., the bell on her gallery door chimed. The man who entered was not what she expected. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a way that suggested effortless breeding rather than expensive tailoring. He had kind, intelligent eyes and a calm, quiet demeanor that seemed to fill the room. He looked around the small gallery, his gaze appreciative and knowledgeable. "Miss Vance," he asked, his voice carrying a faint, unplaceable European accent. "I am Alistair Windsor. It is a pleasure to meet you. I read the article about your work on the Hotel Beaumont collection. It was very impressive." Amelia, slightly flustered by his commanding yet gentle presence, shook his hand. "Mr. Windsor, thank you for coming. How can I help you?" "I am looking to acquire a piece for my family's foundation," he explained. "Something with a story. My family has always believed that art is not merely an asset, but a vessel of history. Your firm's philosophy seemed to align with ours." For the next 2 hours, they talked not as client and advisor, but as two people who shared a profound love for the stories objects could tell. He spoke of his family's lost collection during the Second World War and his foundation's mission to both acquire new art and recover what was stolen. Amelia, in turn, opened up about her passion for provenance, the detective work of tracing a painting's journey through time. She forgot to be guarded, forgot to be the wounded ex-wife of Richard Sterling. She was simply Amelia Vance, an expert in her field, speaking with an engaging and equally knowledgeable peer. It was only when he handed her his card at the end of their meeting that she made the connection. The card was thick, cream-coloured stock with a simple, elegant crest embossed at the top. The name read, His Serene Highness, Prince Alastair of Montavia. Amelia stared at the card, her mind reeling. Montavia was a small, formerly sovereign principality, nestled between France and Switzerland, known for its banking and philanthropy. Its royal family, while no longer ruling, was immensely respected, wealthy, and deeply involved in charitable works across the globe. Alastair gave a small, almost apologetic smile. I find Mr. Windsor facilitates more honest conversations, don't you think? People can be rather different when a title enters the room before they do. Amelia felt a blush creep up her neck. Your Highness, I had no idea. Please call me Alastair, he insisted warmly, and I would be honoured if you would assist me. I am also hosting a small reception for my foundation's board next month. I would be delighted if you would attend as my guest. I believe your insights would be invaluable. Over the following weeks, their professional relationship blossomed. Alastair was a frequent visitor to Vance Curations. He was fascinated by her work, by the meticulous way she uncovered the hidden histories of forgotten artworks. He never once mentioned Richard Sterling. He never asked about her divorce or her past life. He was interested in her, her mind, her passion, her resilience. He treated her not as a broken thing to be fixed, but as a remarkable woman who had built something beautiful from the ashes of her old life. With him, she felt seen in a way she hadn't in over a decade. He wasn't a knight in shining armor, come to rescue a damsel in distress. He was a kind, brilliant man who saw the queen who had always been there, waiting to reclaim her own throne. The quiet respect in his eyes was worth more than all the diamonds Richard had ever bought her. For the first time since the shattering, Amelia felt the solid ground of her own worth beneath her feet. One crisp autumn afternoon, a thick cream-coloured envelope arrived at Vance Curations by messenger. It was heavy, the kind of stationery designed to convey importance before it was even opened. Amelia slit the seal with a palette knife, her stomach tightening with a familiar sense of dread. The embossed logo at the top was unmistakable. Sterling Enterprises. It was an invitation to the 10th annual Sterling Foundation Gala, the crown jewel of New York's philanthropic calendar. It was an event Amelia had planned and executed for 9 consecutive years. She knew the caterers, the florists, the seating charts. She knew it was Richard's favorite night of the year, a spectacle designed to showcase his power, his wealth, and his supposed generosity. Her name on the invitation was a deliberate, calculated cruelty, Ms. Amelia Vance. Not the familiar, warm Mr. and Mrs. Richard Sterling of years past, but a cold, formal acknowledgement of her new diminished status. Tucked inside was a handwritten note on Richard's personal letterhead. Amelia, I thought it only fair to extend an invitation. It's important to show the world there are no hard feelings. A chance for you to see what we've built. Crystal is chairing the committee this year. I'm sure you'll agree she's done a marvelous job. All the best, Richard. Every word was a perfectly aimed barb. No hard feelings. A lie so blatant it was insulting. What we've built. A deliberate twisting of the knife reminding her of her erased contributions. And the mention of Crystal as the new chair that was the masterstroke of his malice. He wasn't inviting her. He was summoning her to witness her replacement. He wanted her to sit in a corner, a lonely ghost at the feast, and watch Crystal shine in the spotlight Amelia herself had created. He wanted to parade his victory in front of her and the whole of New York society. She crumpled the invitation in her fist, the sharp edges of the card digging into her palm. Her first instinct was to throw it in the trash, to burn it, to pretend it had never arrived. Why would she subject herself to such a public humiliation? To see the pitying looks, to hear the whispers, to face the man who had torn her life apart and the woman who had happily taken her place. She was recounting the story to Sophia later that evening over a glass of wine, her voice tight with renewed anger. "It's a command performance," Amelia said, pacing her small living room. "He wants to put me on display. Look at my sad, pathetic ex-wife. Look how much better my life is now. I can't go. I won't." Sophia took a sip of her wine, her expression thoughtful. "Or," she said slowly, "you go, but you don't go as his sad, pathetic ex-wife." "What are you talking about?" "Think about it, Ames. Right now he controls the narrative. He's the powerful tycoon who upgraded his life. You're the forgotten woman. As long as you hide, you let that story stand. But if you walk into that ballroom, looking incredible with your head held high, you're not a victim. You're a survivor. You're telling him and everyone else that your story didn't end when his chapter with you did. You're starting a new one." Amelia was still hesitant. "I'd have to go alone. It would be unbearable." The next day, Alistair stopped by the gallery to review a final report on a potential acquisition. He immediately sensed her distraction. He had a way of seeing past the polite facade she presented to the world. "Something is troubling you, Amelia," he said gently, his eyes full of concern. Hesitantly, she told him about the invitation. She didn't editorialize or embellish. She just stated the facts, the note from Richard and her subsequent turmoil. She expected him to offer sympathy, perhaps to agree that she shouldn't go. Instead, he listened intently, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was silent for a moment before speaking. "This man, your ex-husband," he said, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of steel. "He seems to believe he holds all the power in your story." "He does," Amelia replied, the words tasting like ash. "Only if you allow him to," Alistair countered. He paused, then looked at her directly. "I have a proposal. My foundation has been considering a significant partnership with a New York-based enterprise for our new North American initiative. Sterling Enterprises is on the shortlist. It would be advantageous for me to attend this gala, to observe the leadership." He leaned forward slightly. "Amelia, it would be my honor if you would accompany me, not as a favor to you, but as my respected colleague and guest." Amelia stared at him, stunned. He was offering her more than an escort. He was offering her a shield, a context, a new narrative. She wouldn't be Amelia Vance, the lonely ex-wife. She would be the esteemed guest of Prince Alistair of Montavia. He was framing it as business, a move of strategic elegance that spared her pride and offered her an unassailable position. A slow, brilliant smile spread across her face for the first time in days. The fear that had been lodged in her chest began to recede, replaced by a thrilling, unfamiliar surge of courage. "Alistair," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I would be delighted." The dagger Richard had sent, wrapped in silken words, was about to be returned to him, and Amelia was going to be the one to deliver it. The night of the Sterling Foundation Gala arrived on a wave of cold, crystalline air. The venue was the Pierre Hotel, its grand ballroom transformed into a glittering testament to Richard's ego. Towering floral arrangements crowded every surface. Ice sculptures of the Sterling Enterprises logo melted slowly under the heat of 1,000 spotlights, and champagne flowed from fountains like water. The elite of New York were all there, a sea of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos, their laughter and chatter a constant humming roar. Richard Sterling was in his element. He stood at the center of the room, a king holding court in a palace of his own making. On his arm was Crystal Monroe, poured into a siren-red dress that left little to the imagination. A necklace of enormous diamonds, a new and ostentatious acquisition, blazed at her throat. She preened under the flash of photographers' bulbs, her smile wide and practiced. Richard beamed, accepting compliments, shaking hands, soaking in the adoration. He felt invincible. He had built all of this, and now he had the perfect, beautiful accessory to prove it. He took to the stage to make his welcoming remarks. His voice boomed through the sound system, filled with self-congratulatory rhetoric about charity vision and the future of Sterling Enterprises. And I couldn't have done any of this without the inspiration and support of my incredible partner, the chair of this year's gala. Crystal Monroe, he declared, pulling her to his side for a dramatic kiss that was met with a ripple of polite applause. He scanned the crowd, a small, cruel part of him, looking for Amelia. He'd made sure her ticket was for a table at the back near the service entrance. He hoped she was there watching, understanding her complete and utter irrelevance. It was at that precise moment that the grand double doors at the entrance of the ballroom, which had been closed after the initial rush of guests, were pushed open by the hotel staff. A hush began at the entrance and spread through the room like a shockwave. The cacophony of chatter and clinking glasses slowly died down, replaced by a wave of murmurs, then stunned silence. Heads turned one by one, craning to see the source of the commotion. Even Richard, mid-sentence, faltered on stage, his words trailing off as he followed the collective gaze of his guests. Standing in the doorway, framed by the opulent gold leaf, was Amelia Vance. She was not the subdued, tastefully invisible woman he remembered. She was a vision. She wore a gown of deep sapphire silk that shimmered under the chandeliers, a classic, elegant silhouette that spoke of timeless grace, not fleeting trends. Her hair was swept up in a sophisticated chignon showcasing the graceful line of her neck, and a pair of exquisite sapphire and diamond earrings that glittered with quiet fire. Her makeup was understated, yet flawless. She looked radiant, serene, and utterly breathtaking. She radiated a confidence that was not borrowed or bought, but earned. But it wasn't just her stunning transformation that had stopped the room cold. It was the man by her side. Prince Alistair of Montavia stood with his hand resting gently on the small of her back. He was the picture of understated nobility, his tuxedo perfectly tailored, his bearing calm and dignified. He scanned the room with an air of polite authority, his presence a stark contrast to Richard's boisterous showmanship. He was not a celebrity, he was royalty, and the distinction was palpable. The crowd erupted in a flurry of whispers. "Is that Amelia Vance? My God, she looks incredible. Who is that with her? Wait, is that Prince Alistair? What is he doing here and with her?" The photographers, who had been lazily snapping pictures of Richard and Crystal, suddenly swarmed towards the entrance, their flashes firing in a frantic, blinding volley. The spotlight had shifted violently and irrevocably. On stage, Richard stared, his face a mask of disbelief. The triumphant smile froze, then melted into a slack-jawed gape. He felt a surge of pure, hot fury. This was his night, his gala. How dare she? How dare she walk in here looking like that on the arm of a prince? It was impossible. It had to be a trick. Crystal, sensing the shift in the room's energy, gripped his arm. "Who is that?" she hissed, her voice laced with insecurity. The diamonds around her neck suddenly felt garish and cheap compared to the quiet elegance of the woman who had just entered. Amelia didn't scan the crowd for Richard. She kept her eyes forward, a small, calm smile on her face, as Alistair guided her into the room. She wasn't looking for her ex-husband. She wasn't there for him at all. She moved through the parted sea of guests, the whispers following her like the train of a gown. She was no longer a ghost at this feast. She was the main event. And as she and Alistair were graciously guided to a prime table near the front, one hastily arranged by the fawning hotel manager, Richard Sterling, standing on his own stage, had never felt so small. The sound that filled the room was no longer applause for him, but the deafening sound of 1,000 whispers, all asking the same question. Who was Amelia Vance, really? The atmosphere in the ballroom had been irrevocably altered. The air crackled with a new delicious tension. Richard stumbled through the rest of his speech, his voice now sounding hollow and forced. The applause was distracted. All eyes were on Amelia's table, where she sat engaged in a quiet, animated conversation with Prince Alistair. They laughed at something he said, and the image of her genuine, unburdened joy was a more potent weapon than any angry words could ever have been. Richard descended from the stage, his face a thunderous mask. Crystal followed her earlier confidence replaced by a petulant anxiety. "Richard, do something," she demanded in a harsh whisper. "Everyone is staring at her. This is my night. I'm aware." Richard snapped, his eyes locked on Amelia. He saw his carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. He couldn't stand it. He had to reassert his dominance. Leaving Crystal behind, he strode towards Amelia's table, a predatory smile plastered on his face. He intended to play the part of the magnanimous ex-husband, to welcome her in a way that would subtly belittle her, to show everyone that he was above it all. Several of his key business partners, including the powerful and old-moneyed Mr. Davenport, watched the unfolding drama with keen interest. "Amelia," Richard boomed, arriving at the table, "I'm so glad you could make it. You look, well." The compliment was delivered with a dismissive air, as if her appearance was a mildly pleasant surprise, like a well-behaved child. Amelia looked up at him, her expression perfectly composed. There was no fear in her eyes, no lingering pain. There was only a cool, placid calm. "Richard, thank you for the invitation. You remember I always loved this ballroom." Her response was polite, yet it carried a subtle reminder of her history, of her intrinsic part in all of this. Richard's smile tightened. He turned his attention to Alistair, extending a hand. "Richard Sterling, I don't believe we've been introduced." Alistair rose slightly from his chair, a gesture of politeness, but he did not take Richard's hand. "Alistair Windsor," he said, his voice even and cool. "A pleasure. I was just telling Miss Vance how impressed I am with the work of her firm. Her eye for art, with historical significance, is truly unparalleled." The casual professional praise from a man of Alistair's stature was a direct hit to Richard's ego. He had tried to frame Amelia as a nobody, and in one sentence the prince had established her as a respected professional. "Her firm," Richard scoffed, unable to help himself. "A little hobby to keep her busy, is it? That's nice." The condescension hung heavy in the air. Mr. Davenport, who was standing at a nearby table, raised a single critical eyebrow. This was not the behavior of a confident leader. Before Amelia could respond, Alistair spoke, his tone remaining deceptively mild. "On the contrary, my foundation is considering Vance Curations to oversee a significant new acquisition project. Her hobby, as you call it, is about to become a major force in the international art scene. We value integrity and expertise above all." He then looked directly at Richard, his gaze sharp. "Which brings me to my presence here tonight, Mr. Sterling. The Montavia Foundation was considering Sterling Enterprises for a substantial philanthropic partnership. Your foundation's public mission statement is impressive." Richard's chest puffed out. This was more like it. A potential partnership with a royal foundation. This would cement his legacy. "Well, I can assure you, Your Highness, our commitment to—" However, Alistair cut in smoothly, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more serious. "We believe that an organization's character is a direct reflection of its leadership. True philanthropy, in our view, begins with how one treats people. All people." The implication was crystal clear and utterly devastating. Alistair's gaze flickered for a fraction of a second to Amelia and then back to Richard. The unspoken message was a cannon blast in the quiet tension around the table. "I have seen how you treat people, and I am not impressed." Richard paled. The blood drained from his face, replaced by a mottled, angry red. He was being judged, publicly, by a man whose quiet words carried more weight than all of Richard's blustering speeches. He felt his power, the very thing this gala was meant to celebrate, slipping through his fingers like sand. He turned his fury on Amelia, his last resort. "What did you tell him?" He hissed, his voice low and venomous, the charming facade completely gone. "What lies have you been spinning about me?" Amelia finally met his gaze, and for the first time he saw not the woman he had broken, but the woman who had risen from the ashes. "I didn't have to say a word. Richard," she said, her voice clear and steady, audible to the nearby listeners. "Your character speaks for itself. It always has." It was a final, perfect cut. Richard stood there speechless and exposed his own boorishness and cruelty, laid bare for all to see. Mr. Davenport slowly turned away, a look of profound disappointment on his face, and began a quiet conversation with another investor. The seeds of doubt had been sown. The cracks in Richard Sterling's crown were beginning to show, and they were spreading fast. He had tried to humiliate his ex-wife and had only succeeded in humiliating himself on the grandest stage he could have possibly built. The fallout from the gala was not a slow burn. It was a detonation. By 7 a.m. the next morning, the digital editions of every major society and news outlet had splashed their front pages with the story. The narrative wasn't merely about a surprising guest list. It was a full-blown coronation. The lead photograph, a stunning candid shot, was ubiquitous. Amelia caught, mid-laugh, looking up at Prince Alistair, her face illuminated with a genuine joy that no photographer could stage. Alistair, in turn, was looking down at her, his expression one of pure, unguarded admiration. They were a portrait of elegance and intimacy. Juxtaposed against this, often in a smaller inset photo, was Richard Sterling, on the stage, his face a mask of slack-jawed fury, with a visibly panicked Crystal clutching his arm. The headlines were merciless. Sterling's ex-wife re-emerges with royalty. The Prince and the Pariah. How Amelia Vance stole the show. And the most damning of all, from a ruthless financial blog. A royal rebuke is Richard Sterling losing his Midas touch. Richard woke to the buzzing of his phone on the nightstand, a frantic, incessant vibration that signaled a crisis. He swiped it open, and his world tilted. His PR chief, a man paid a king's ransom to spin gold from straw, was on the other end, his voice strained. "Richard, we have a problem. A big one. I've been fielding calls since 5 a.m. No one is asking about the foundation's donation numbers. They're all asking about Amelia Vance and the Prince." Richard threw back the silk sheets and strode to the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. The city was waking up below him, oblivious. "So, what?" he snarled. "Spin it. Say I'm happy for her. Magnanimous. Civilized divorce." "It's too late for that," the PR man said, his voice grim. "Reporters from 3 different tables overheard your confrontation. They're running with the narrative that Prince Alistair publicly questioned your character before snubbing a potential partnership. Davenport's office has already issued a no comment on his continued investment in the Hudson Yards project, which is journalistic code for "we're pulling out." The story isn't that you're civilized. The story is that you're mamu. The word hung in the air. Toxic. Richard, who had built his brand on being desirable, powerful, a winner, was now toxic. He ended the call, his hand trembling with rage. He saw Crystal across the room, already dressed, scrolling furiously through her own phone, her face pale. "This is a disaster," she said, not looking at him. "My agent just called. That jewelry brand that wanted me as a spokesperson, they're reevaluating their brand alignment. This is your fault." "My fault," he roared, the sound echoing in the cavernous, impersonal space. She walked in on his arm. "How is that my fault?" "You had to go over there. You had to make a scene," she screamed back. You look like a fool, Richard, and you made me look like a fool's accessory. The transactional nature of their relationship had never been more apparent. His value had plummeted, and with it so had hers. The argument was the first of many, each one more venomous than the last, the sound of two rats fighting over the scraps of a sinking ship. Meanwhile, in her quiet apartment on the Upper West Side, Amelia was woken, not by a phone, but by the gentle aroma of fresh coffee. Sophia let herself in with her spare key, a stack of newspapers tucked under her arm, and a triumphant grin on her face. "Room service for the Queen," she announced, placing a tray on the coffee table. Amelia sat up, wrapping a robe around herself. She hadn't slept much, her mind replaying the events of the night in a dizzying loop. "I feel strange," she confessed. "Strange good, I hope," Sophia said, pouring a coffee, "because, according to the New York press, you are the most fascinating woman in the world today." She spread the newspapers across the table. Amelia stared at her own face at the woman in the sapphire dress. She looked happy. She looked free. It was the face of a stranger she was only just beginning to know. There was a quiet satisfaction, but it wasn't the gleeful schadenfreude as she might have once expected to feel. It was something deeper, a sense of profound and peaceful closure. Richard's tantrum, his public unraveling, it hadn't been her victory. Her victory was the genuine laugh captured in that photograph, a moment that had absolutely nothing to do with him. The first tremor in Richard's business empire hit 4 days after the gala. He was in a board meeting trying to project an aura of calm control when his CFO was handed a note. The man blanched. "Richard," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Davenport Capital has formally withdrawn from the Hudson Yards project, and they've liquidated their entire position in Sterling Enterprises." The news hit the boardroom like a physical blow. Davenport wasn't just an investor. He was a seal of approval from the old money establishment. His exit was a signal to the rest of the market the ship was taking on water. Over the next few weeks, the signal turned into a stampede. Deals that were all but signed were suddenly put on indefinite hold. Credit lines were tightened. The business press, smelling blood, began a deep dive into Sterling's aggressive accounting practices, something no one had dared to question when he was on top. Richard became a recluse, his legendary confidence shattered, replaced by a paranoid fury. He blamed Amelia, he blamed Alistair, he blamed Crystal, he blamed his PR team. He blamed everyone but the man in the mirror, whose own hubris had been the architect of his downfall. His relationship with Crystal imploded in spectacular fashion. The final argument took place in the vast, sterile living room of the penthouse. "I'm leaving Richard," she announced, gesturing to a line of packed designer luggage by the door. "I've spoken to a lawyer. I'll be fair, but I won't be made a fool of." "You can't leave me," he bellowed, a desperate, pathetic edge to his voice. "Everything you are is because of me." Crystal let out a cold, sharp laugh. "No, Richard. Everything I have is because of you, and I plan to keep it. But who I am? I'm a survivor. And you," she said, her eyes sweeping over him with disdain, "are no longer a viable investment." She walked out without a backward glance, the sharp click of her heels on the marble floor, the final punctuation mark on his failed fantasy. While Richard's world was shrinking, Amelia's was expanding at an astonishing rate. The day after the gala, the phone at Vance Curations had started ringing, and it hadn't stopped. The first call was from a curator at the Met inquiring about a consultation. Then came an email from the office of a world-renowned architect wanting to commission her to source the art for a new private museum in Dubai. Old clients who had abandoned her after the divorce suddenly reappeared full of false bonhomie. Amelia, with Sophia's gleeful guidance, tripled her rates for their business. She hired 2 sharp, ambitious art history graduates to help manage the workload. The small gallery in Chelsea became a vibrant, energetic space, a stark contrast to the tomb-like silence of Richard's penthouse. She found her stride as a leader, discovering a talent for nurturing her young employees' skills. She was building something real, something that had value beyond a name or a price tag. Her relationship with Alistair grew in the quiet spaces between the chaos. He was a constant calming presence. He never presumed to advise her on her business, but he was a brilliant listener, his insightful questions often helping her clarify her own thoughts. They discovered a shared love for old films, rainy Sunday afternoons spent in dusty bookshops, and the simple pleasure of a long walk with no destination. He showed her his world, not the pomp and circumstance of royalty, but the genuine passion behind his foundation's work. She in turn showed him her world, the stories hidden in a brushstroke, the history contained in a single object. One evening, about 2 months after the gala, he took her to a small, unassuming Italian restaurant in Greenwich Village. Over pasta and red wine, he formally offered the partnership. The board was unanimously impressed with your proposal, Amelia. He said, his tone professional, but his eyes warm. They agree that Vance Curations is the perfect firm to lead our new repatriated art initiative. Tears welled in Amelia's eyes, and for a moment she couldn't speak. It wasn't just the contract which was life-changing, it was the validation. It was the fact that he had waited, letting her business boom on its own merits before making this official. He had ensured no one could ever claim she was handed this opportunity. He had protected her victory, making sure it was entirely her own. Alistair, she finally whispered, thank you. Thank you, Amelia. He replied, reaching across the table to take her hand. You have brought a remarkable clarity and passion to this project. We are the fortunate ones. The culmination of it all came 6 months after that fateful night at a villa overlooking Lake Geneva. The Montavia Foundation's board meeting had been a resounding success. Amelia had presented her strategic plan for the new museum wing, speaking with an authority and confidence that captivated the room of powerful, discerning men and women. She was not the prince's companion. She was a world-class expert, a visionary in her field. Later that evening, she stood on the balcony, the cool Swiss air a balm on her skin. The lake was a sheet of dark glass reflecting the diamond-like stars above. Alistair came to stand beside her, wrapping a warm cashmere coat around her shoulders. A beautiful view, he said softly. Yes, it is, she replied, her gaze distant. She had seen an alert on her phone just before stepping outside. Sterling Enterprises enters receivership. Founder Richard Sterling forced out. It felt like news from another lifetime about a man she barely knew. There was no surge of triumph, no vindictive pleasure. There was only a quiet, detached pity for a man who had built a glittering empire of sand, only to be surprised when the tide came in. What are you thinking about? Alistair asked, sensing her reflective mood. She turned to face him, a real, serene smile on her face. I was thinking about foundations, she said. My old life was built on a foundation of wealth and image. It was hollow. It couldn't withstand a single storm. And now, she paused, looking out at the steadfast ancient mountains across the lake. Now I feel like I'm standing on solid ground, ground I cleared and leveled myself. Her victory wasn't Richard's downfall. Her victory wasn't even the prince at her side as wonderful as he was. Her true triumph was the woman she saw in the reflection on the glass, a woman who was strong, independent, and whole. The prince was a cherished part of her new kingdom, but he was not its ruler. The crown was her own hard-won independence. Her scepter was her talent, and her throne was the life she now commanded. Her reign, born from the ashes of a gilded cage, had just begun. And so, Amelia's story teaches us that true power isn't about the life someone else builds for you, but the one you build for yourself from the ground up. She walked into that ballroom, not just to face her past, but to claim her future, reminding everyone that dignity and self-worth are the most priceless jewels a person can wear. Her ex-husband wanted to make her a footnote in his story, but she became the author of her own epic. What did you think of Amelia's incredible transformation? Was Richard's downfall everything you hoped it would be? Let us know your favorite moment in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of resilience and ultimate triumph, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories of justice and empowerment. Click that bell icon so you never miss a single moment. A single sentence can shatter a world. For Isabella Rossi, that sentence was uttered over a $400 plate of seared scallops she couldn't afford by a man she thought she loved. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, swirling a glass of vintage Bordeaux, and smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Honestly, Izzy," he said, his voice a polished blend of pity and condescension, "this little coding project of yours, it's a cute hobby, but it's time to be realistic. It's never going to be your career." He didn't know that in 6 weeks, that cute hobby would make her the youngest self-made female billionaire in the country. And he definitely didn't know that the first thing she'd do with that power was buy the very company he was desperate to become a partner in. His world was about to be shattered, and she was the one holding the hammer. The restaurant was called Aurelia, a name that dripped with the kind of old-world money that Brendan Cole was born into, and Isabella Rossi had only ever observed from the outside. It was all dark mahogany, hushed conversations, and waiters who moved with the silent, ghostly efficiency of men who were paid to be invisible. This was Brendan's world. He thrived in it, navigated it with an inherited ease that Isabella, for all her ferocious intelligence, could never quite replicate. She felt the familiar prickle of being an imposter. Her dress, a simple but elegant navy sheath, had cost a week's salary. Brendan's suit, a bespoke piece from Savile Row, probably cost more than her car. They were celebrating his latest promotion at Sterling Wakefield, the private equity firm where his father was a senior partner. Brendan was now a vice president, another gilded step on a path that had been paved for him since birth. "To the future," Brendan toasted, clinking his crystal glass against hers. "And to you finally leaving that dead-end job at Innovatech." Isabella stiffened. "It's not a dead-end job, Brendan. It's a stepping stone. And Project Chimera is—" He cut her off with a placating wave of his hand. I know. Project Chimera. Your AI algorithm. It's brilliant, I'm sure, for an academic paper, but a real-world application. The market is brutal, Izzy. It's dominated by giants. Google, Goldman Sachs. They have armies of PhDs working on this stuff. And I have something they don't, Isabella countered, her voice low but firm. My model is different. It's not just predictive, it's adaptive. It learns from market sentiment, not just historical data. It can anticipate black swan events with a 7% higher accuracy rate than anything currently on the market. She had spent 3 years on it. 3 years of sleepless nights fueled by cheap coffee and an unshakable belief in her own code. It was her life's work, hidden away on a private server running simulations that were yielding results so spectacular they frightened even her. Brendan sighed, the sound of a patient parent explaining the world to a naive child. Listen to yourself. It sounds wonderful, but who's going to fund it? Who's going to take a chance on a junior analyst from a mid-tier tech firm? I'm just trying to protect you. My father has already spoken to a contact at Sotheby's. They're looking for an art history consultant. With your eye, you'd be perfect. Less stress, great connections, you can travel with me. The blood drained from Isabella's face. Art history. She had a master's degree in computational finance, another in artificial intelligence from Stanford. He was suggesting she abandon it all to become a social accessory, an intellectually stimulating companion for his high-flying life. This was the moment, the final clarifying insult in a long line of them. It wasn't just that he didn't believe in her, he actively disdained her ambition. He saw it as a character flaw, an unsightly blemish on the otherwise perfect canvas of the life he had planned for them. "You don't get it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You have never not once tried to understand what I do." "Because I understand how the world works," he retorted, his patience finally snapping. The polished veneer cracked, revealing the raw arrogance beneath. "It works on power, on connections, on capital, not on some fantasy algorithm you built in your spare time. It's a cute little project, Izzy. A hobby. Now let's be realistic. Focus on us. Focus on a life that's real." That was the sentence, the one that echoed in the cavernous silence that followed. A cute little hobby. Isabella looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in months. She didn't see the handsome, charming man she had fallen for. She saw a gatekeeper, a man whose entire identity was built on a foundation of inherited privilege, terrified by the thought that someone, especially a woman he was supposed to possess, could build her own empire from scratch. Slowly, she placed her napkin on the table. She stood up, her movements deliberate and calm. The entire restaurant seemed to fade into a blur. "You're right, Brendan," she said, her voice clear and devoid of emotion. "It's time for me to be realistic." He smiled, relieved. "Good. I knew you'd see it my way." "My realism," she continued, picking up her small clutch from the table, "is that I am sitting across from a man who is so profoundly insecure that he has to belittle my life's work to feel powerful. My realism is that I have wasted 2 years of my life with someone who sees me as an accessory, not a partner. And my realism," she took a deep breath, "is that this is over. We are over." Brendan's face went from smug relief to crimson fury in a heartbeat. "You're throwing this away for a fantasy. You'll come crawling back in a month when you realize you can't pay your rent." A ghost of a smile touched Isabella's lips. It was a cold, sharp thing. "Don't hold your breath." She turned and walked away, leaving him sitting alone with 2 entrees, a £1, 200 a bottle of wine, and a look of pure, unadulterated shock. She didn't look back. As the cool night air of the city hit her face, she didn't feel heartbroken. She felt liberated. She felt angry. And more than anything, she felt a burning, all-consuming drive. He thought her work was a hobby. She was about to show him and the rest of the world just how powerful a hobby could be. The week following the breakup was a descent into a specific kind of hell. The emotional fallout was brutal, but it was the professional sabotage that blindsided her. Brendan, it turned out, was not a man who took rejection gracefully. He was a man who scorched the earth. Isabella arrived at her desk at Innovatech Financial on Monday morning to find her access card deactivated. Her direct manager, a perpetually stressed but generally decent man named David Chen, met her by the elevators with a pained expression. "Isabella, Arthur Finch wants to see you. Now." Arthur Finch was the CEO of Innovatech. He was a relic of a bygone era, a man who wore suspenders unironically and believed innovation was something you bought, not cultivated. Isabella had met him twice in 3 years, both times in passing. His corner office felt like a museum exhibit on 1980s corporate power. Heavy oak desk, leather-bound books that looked untouched, and a panoramic view of the city that seemed wasted on him. "Miss Rossi," Finch began, not bothering with pleasantries, "it has come to my attention that you have been using company resources for an unauthorized personal project." Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. "Mr. Finch Project's chimera is a breach of your employment contract," he snapped. "Article 7, Section B, all intellectual property developed using company time or equipment is the sole property of Innovatech Financial. You have been running this chimera on our servers, constituting a significant security risk and a flagrant violation of policy." Isabella was floored. "With all due respect, sir, the core code was developed on my personal hardware. I've only been using the servers to run simulations against anonymized public domain market data. It poses no security risk whatsoever. David knows about my work." Finch waved a dismissive hand. Mr. Chen is not the one who signs your paychecks. We have also received a tip from a highly respected source in the financial community. A tip. She knew instantly who it was from. Brendan. He must have called Finch over a game of golf at their exclusive country club. He would have framed it as a friendly warning, a concern for Innovatech's security, all while painting Isabella as a reckless, untrustworthy employee. The tip suggests your algorithm is not only unauthorized but potentially unstable and could expose the firm to legal liabilities. It was a perfectly crafted corporate assassination, vague, impossible to disprove, and coming from a source whose credibility Finch would never question. That's a lie, Isabella said, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. My project is sound. The simulations are flawless. I'm not interested in your simulations, Miss Rosie, Finch said coldly. I'm interested in protecting this company. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings. You will sign this non-disclosure and non-compete agreement. Our lawyers will be in touch. He slid a thick legal document across the desk. It was a gag order and a professional prison sentence rolled into one. It would prevent her from working in AI-driven finance for 2 years and from ever speaking about Project Chimera. She stared at the paper, then at Finch's impassive face. This was it. Brendan hadn't just broken up with her. He was trying to break her spirit, to cripple her career so thoroughly that his prophecy of her failure would come true. He wanted her to come crawling back, not to him, but to the life he had prescribed for her. No, she said. Finch raised an eyebrow. I beg your pardon. I'm not signing it, Isabella stated, pushing the document back across the desk. You are firing me, based on a malicious and unsubstantiated rumor. You have no claim to my intellectual property, and I will not sign away my right to work. Finch's face hardened. You are making a grave mistake, young lady. We will litigate. We will bury you in legal fees until you are bankrupt. Then I'll see you in court, she said, her voice finding a strength she didn't know she possessed. She stood up. You don't need to have security escort me. I know the way out. The walk back to her desk was the longest of her life. The pitying stares, the whispers. She packed her small box, a photo of her parents, a worn copy of a book on neural networks, a lucky coffee mug. David Chen intercepted her by the door, his face etched with guilt. Isabella, I'm so sorry. I tried to tell him, I showed him your progress reports. He wouldn't listen. It wasn't your fault, David, she said, managing a weak smile. Thank you for believing in me. Your work. It's revolutionary, he whispered, looking around nervously. Don't let them take it from you. That night, in her small, overpriced apartment, the full weight of her situation crashed down on her. No job, dwindling savings, the looming threat of a legal battle against a multi-million-dollar corporation. Brendan's words echoed in her ears. You'll come crawling back, she cried, a gut-wrenching, soul-emptying sob that left her feeling hollowed out. She was alone, unemployed, and about to be sued into oblivion. For a few dark hours, she let the despair win. She scrolled through job listings for positions she was wildly overqualified for, just to feel a flicker of hope. Then, around 3 a.m., surrounded by takeout containers and a profound sense of defeat, something shifted. The image of Arthur Finch's smug face, of Brendan's condescending smile, ignited a different kind of fire. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. It was about proving them all wrong. She wiped her eyes, walked over to her custom-built desktop computer, her one true luxury, and powered it on. The screen flickered to life, showing lines of pristine, elegant code. Project Chimera, her creation. They thought they could take it, bury it, and bury her with it. They had no idea what it was truly capable of. For the next 2 weeks, Isabella didn't just work. She waged a silent, one-woman war. She lived on coffee and protein bars. She disconnected her phone. She ignored the threatening letters from Innovatech's legal team that started piling up by her door. She poured every ounce of her energy, her genius, and her rage into the final evolution of her algorithm. She wasn't just running simulations anymore. She was preparing it for the real world. She refined the sentiment analysis module, feeding it terabytes of live news feeds, social media chatter, and political discourse. She strengthened the adaptive learning protocols, making the system so agile it could pivot its strategy in microseconds. She was building a weapon. One night, while running a final full-scale backtest against the last decade of market data, the results scrolled across her screen. The performance was staggering. If Chimera had been live during the 2008 financial crisis, it wouldn't just have avoided the crash. It would have shorted the market with such precision that an initial investment of $10,000 would have yielded over 50 million. It had predicted the dot-com bubble, the flash crash of 2010, every major market shift, with terrifying accuracy. She stared at the numbers, her heart pounding. This wasn't just a product, it was a paradigm shift. It was the key to a kingdom. But a key was useless without a door to unlock. She had the most powerful financial tool in the world and precisely $0 to implement it. Innovatech's lawsuit was coming. Her time was running out. She needed a miracle. She needed a backer with capital so vast and a risk appetite so huge that they would be willing to bet on a disgraced analyst against the entire financial establishment. She needed a ghost, and she knew of only one. A name whispered in hushed, reverent tones in the darkest corners of the tech world. A man who had vanished from public life a decade ago after his own legendary battle with Wall Street. A reclusive genius named Silas Black. Finding him was impossible. Contacting him was a fantasy. But for Isabella, fantasy was all she had left. Silas Black was more of a myth than a man. In the early 2000s, his company, Cassandra Data, had pioneered the very concept of algorithmic trading, making him a billionaire before he was 30. Then, after a brutal, hostile takeover attempt by a consortium of investment banks, an attempt he famously thwarted by liquidating their key holdings in a single afternoon, nearly crashing the Nasdaq in the process, he had simply vanished. He sold his company, took his fortune, and disappeared from the face of the earth. Rumors placed him on a private island in a fortified bunker in Wyoming, or even dead. Isabella only knew of him because of a single formative event in her academic life. During her master's program at Stanford, she had entered the prestigious Black Box Challenge, a hackathon for quantitative analysts. The anonymous sponsor of the challenge was legend, had it Silas Black himself. The goal was to design an algorithm that could find the signal in the noise of a chaotic dataset. Isabella didn't win, but she placed third. Her prize was a small scholarship and a cryptic email from a heavily encrypted address. It contained only one line. "Good work. Most people miss the ghost variable. You didn't. Keep going." She had saved the email, a digital trophy from a faceless mentor. Now it was her only lifeline. With trembling hands, she composed a new message. It was a desperate shot in the dark, an electronic prayer sent into the void. She didn't beg or plead. She laid out the facts with cold, mathematical precision. Subject the ghost variable. Project Chimera. To encrypted address. You told me once to keep going. I did. I built Chimera. It's an adaptive, sentiment-driven predictive model. It anticipates black swan events by quantifying chaotic social and political data. The ghost variables the market ignores. Backtesting shows a 92% success rate in predicting major market shifts. Beta, 0.8 48 hours in advance. I have been fired from Innovatech Financial. They are attempting to steal the IP and are suing me into silence. My ex-boyfriend, Brendan Cole of Sterling Wakefield, instigated it. I have the most powerful financial algorithm in the world. I have zero capital and about 3 weeks until I'm legally and financially buried. You fought the banks and won. They are trying to do to me what they did to you. I am not asking for a handout. I am offering an opportunity. My algorithm, your capital. Together we can do more than just make money. We can break the system. Attached is the white paper for Chimera and a single time-locked prediction for a minor, obscure commodities future set to mature in 48 hours. Proof of concept. Isabella Rossi. She attached the files, her finger hovering over the send button. It was insane. He probably wouldn't even see it. The address was likely defunct. And if he did see it, why would he care? She took a deep breath and clicked. The email vanished from her outbox, swallowed by the infinite web. For a full day, there was nothing. Silence. Isabella's fleeting hope began to curdle back into despair. She started drafting replies to the want ads for data entry clerks. The next evening, as she was microwaving a cup of noodles, her burner phone, a cheap prepaid device she'd bought for cash, buzzed. An unknown blocked number. She almost ignored it. "Hello," she answered, her voice wary. The voice on the other end was rough, gravelly, as if it hadn't been used for conversation in years. "Miss Rossi, the ghost variable in the Palladium future was the sudden union strike at the South African mine. The news broke an hour ago. The future jumped 18%. Your prediction was off by 0.2%. Isabella's spoon clattered to the floor. It was him. It had to be him. "How?" she stammered. "Your white paper is intriguing," the voice continued, ignoring her question. "Ambitious. Arrogant even. I like it. Innovatech is a third-rate firm run by a fossil. Sterling Wakefield is a den of thieves. Brendan Cole is his father's son, all pedigree, no vision. I have followed your career since the Black Box Challenge. I knew you had potential." Isabella sank into a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly weak. He had been watching her. "You have two problems, Miss Rossi," Silas Black said, his voice a low rumble. "First a legal one, second a capital one. We will solve the legal problem with the capital problem. Be at the offices of Rothman, Geller and Sloan, 45th floor, tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. Ask for Mr. Geller. Do not be late. And Miss Rosie." "Yes," she whispered. "Welcome to the war." The line went dead. The next morning, Isabella walked into a law office that made Arthur Finch's look like a suburban dentist's waiting room. A silent receptionist led her to a conference room with a single occupant, a severe-looking man in his 60s with piercing blue eyes. This was Michael Geller, Silas Black's personal attorney, a man known in legal circles as the Shark. "Miss Rossi," Geller said, motioning for her to sit, "Mr. Black has been most emphatic. He has instructed us to resolve your situation with what he calls maximum prejudice." For the next 5 hours, Isabella was swept into a whirlwind. Geller and his team of lawyers dissected Innovatech's case with surgical precision. They laughed at the non-compete Finch had tried to force on her. "This is unenforceable trash," Geller scoffed, tossing the document aside. "Arthur Finch is about to learn a very expensive lesson about baseless litigation." Then came the bigger plan. It was audacious, terrifying, and utterly brilliant. Silas Black wasn't interested in funding a startup. He wasn't interested in a protracted legal battle. He was interested in retribution. "Mr. Black doesn't just want to protect your algorithm. Miss Rossi," Geller explained, a predatory gleam in his eye, "he wants you to have the platform to deploy it. The best way to end a lawsuit from a company is to own the company." Isabella stared at him. "You want to buy Innovatech." "Not buy it in the traditional sense," Geller corrected. "Innovatech is a publicly traded company, albeit a small one. Its stock is undervalued, and its leadership is complacent. Mr. Black has authorized the creation of a shell corporation, Prometheus Capital, with a credit facility of $2 billion. Over the next 2 weeks, we will be quietly acquiring a controlling interest in Innovatech on the open market. It was a hostile takeover. But why? Isabella asked, bewildered. Innovatech is a dinosaur. The technology is outdated. Precisely, Geller said. It's a broken vessel, but it has the necessary infrastructure. The licenses, the regulatory compliance, the trading floor. It's cheaper and faster to buy the vessel and replace the engine than to build a new ship from scratch. And the engine is Project Chimera, and you, Miss Rossi, will be the new captain. The plan was set in motion with breathtaking speed, while Isabella worked with Geller's tech team to secure Chimera on unbreachable servers. A team of traders working from anonymous offices in Zurich and Hong Kong began buying Innovatech stock. They bought in small, untraceable blocks, careful not to trigger any alarms. The stock price began to creep up, but so slowly that market watchers attributed it to random volatility. Meanwhile, Arthur Finch, oblivious, was smugly proceeding with his lawsuit, burning through company cash, to harass Isabella with legal notices. Brendan Cole, at Sterling Wakefield, was likely celebrating his victory, confident that he had successfully neutralized his upstart ex-girlfriend. They were all celebrating on the deck of a ship that was unbeknownst to them being bought out from under their feet. 2 weeks later, Geller called Isabella. "We have it," he said, his voice calm but triumphant. "As of 5 minutes ago, Prometheus Capital owns 51% of Innovatech Financial's outstanding shares. According to SEC regulations, we are required to announce our position and can call an emergency meeting of the board to vote on new leadership. The meeting is set for Monday. Monday, the day of reckoning." Isabella felt a dizzying wave of vertigo. Just weeks ago, she was packing her belongings in a cardboard box. Now, she was the majority shareholder of the company that had fired her. "What do I do now?" she asked Geller. "Now," Geller replied, "you go buy a suit, Miss Rossi. The kind of suit that says, 'I own this room.' On Monday, you're not just getting your job back, you're taking his." The Monday of the emergency board meeting dawned grey and overcast, the sky a blanket of steel over the city. It suited Isabella's mood perfectly. She wasn't nervous. She was a live whale humming with a focused, cold energy she hadn't known she possessed. The suit Geller had advised her to buy wasn't just a suit. It was armor. A custom-tailored, charcoal grey pantsuit by a designer whose name she couldn't pronounce. It was understated, severe, and screamed power. She arrived at the Innovatech Tower at exactly 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the meeting. She wasn't accompanied by Geller's team. They were already upstairs preparing the ground. She walked in alone. The security guard at the front desk, a man who had watched her leave in disgrace weeks earlier, did a double take. "Miss Rossi, you're not on the visitor list." Isabella met his gaze without blinking. "I won't be a visitor for long. Call up to Arthur Finch's office. Tell them Isabella Rossi is here." She enjoyed the flicker of confusion and panic in his eyes as he made the call. She waited perfectly still, a statue of impending doom in the marble lobby. Upstairs, in the 50th floor boardroom, the atmosphere was one of confused irritation. Arthur Finch sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his face florid with indignation. The board members, a collection of aging men in expensive suits, murmured amongst themselves. The only outsider present was Brendan Cole, who Finch had invited as a special consultant to discuss market strategy, a thinly veiled reward for his tip-off. Brendan looked smug, relaxed, the cat that got the cream. "I still don't understand the meaning of this, Michael," Finch grumbled at Michael Geller, who sat calmly at the opposite end of the table with two junior lawyers. "An emergency meeting called by a shell company nobody has ever heard of, Prometheus Capital. This is a disruption of our quarterly planning." "All will be made clear, Arthur," Geller said smoothly. "We are just waiting for the new majority shareholder to arrive." "A new majority shareholder." A ripple of shock went through the room. Brendan's smug expression faltered slightly. He leaned over to Finch. "Did you know about this?" he whispered. Finch just shook his head, looking bewildered. Just then, Finch's personal assistant burst into the room, her face pale. "Mr. Finch, sir, there's a woman here to see you. She's in the lobby. Isabella Rossi." The name hung in the air like a foul odor. Finch's face contorted in disbelief, then rage. "What? What is that insolent girl doing here? Did she come to beg for her job back? Have security remove her from the building immediately." Brendan Cole laughed a short, ugly bark. "The audacity. Some people just don't know when they're beaten." Geller raised a hand. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Arthur." "And why the hell not?" Finch sputtered. "Because, Geller said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "You would be removing the single largest owner of this company, the principal of Prometheus Capital, your new boss." The silence in the room was absolute profound. You could have heard a stock certificate drop. The board members stared at Geller as if he'd just started speaking in tongues. Brendan Cole's face had frozen, his mouth slightly agape, the color draining from his cheeks. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. The boardroom doors swung open. Isabella walked in. She didn't look at Brendan. She didn't look at the stunned board members. Her eyes were locked on one person, Arthur Finch. She walked the length of the table with a steady, unhurried pace, her heels clicking a death knell on the polished hardwood floor. She stopped, not at the side of the table, but at the empty chair right next to Finch's at its head. She placed her leather portfolio on the table. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice cool and steady, amplified by the room's shocked silence. "Arthur, you're in my seat." Finch stared at her, his face a kaleidoscope of confusion, fury, and dawning horror. This is a joke, a prank." Geller cleared his throat. "It is my duty to inform the board," he announced formally, "that as of Friday, 17:00 hours, Prometheus Capital, a firm wholly controlled by Ms. Isabella Rossi, has acquired 51.7% of Innovatech Financial. All necessary filings have been submitted to the SEC. We have the votes. The first order of business for this meeting is a motion to remove Arthur Finch as Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board, effective immediately." One of Geller's associates began passing out documents to the stunned board members. The numbers were all there in black and white, irrefutable. Brendan finally found his voice. It was a strangled, disbelieving whisper. "Izzy, how? What is this?" She finally turned her head and looked at him. There was no anger in her eyes, no hatred, just a vast, chilling indifference. It was the look one gives to a piece of furniture, a background object that has ceased to be of any importance. "It's called a hostile takeover, Brendan," she said simply, as if explaining a basic concept. "It's what happens when you underestimate your competition. You of all people should know that." She then turned her attention back to Finch, whose face was now a dangerous shade of purple. "The motion to remove Mr. Finch from his positions. All in favor?" Geller's hand shot up. "Prometheus Capital votes aye with its entire 51.7% block." The other board members, seasoned veterans of corporate warfare, knew a lost cause when they saw one. Their loyalty was to their stock options, not to a deposed king. One by one, their hands went up. The vote was unanimous. Finch slammed his hand on the table. "This is an outrage, a travesty I built this company. You ran it into the ground," Isabella countered, her voice cutting through his tirade. "You relied on legacy systems, cronyism, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the future of finance. This company has been stagnant for a decade. That ends today." She looked at Geller. "Second motion. A motion to appoint Ms. Isabella Rossi as the new Chief Executive Officer and Chairwoman of the Board," Geller announced. "Prometheus Capital votes aye." It was a formality. In the space of 10 minutes, Isabella Rossi had gone from being a fired, disgraced analyst to the absolute ruler of the company that had cast her out. She stood up and walked to the head of the table as Finch, sputtering with impotent rage, was gently but firmly escorted from the room by Geller's associates. She looked at the faces around the table, shocked, wary, fearful. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice resonating with newfound authority. "The era of complacency at Innovatech is over. We are no longer a follower. We are a predator. We will be implementing a new proprietary trading algorithm that will render every single one of our competitors obsolete. The name of that project is Chimera." She let the name sink in. "Some of you will adapt to this new reality. You will thrive. Those of you who resist change, who cling to the old ways, will be rendered redundant. Your positions will be eliminated." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room until it landed finally on Brendan Cole. He looked physically ill, ashen-faced and trembling. "Oh, and Mr. Cole," she said, her voice laced with ice, "thank you for your consultancy. Your services are no longer required. Security will see you out." She watched as he was led from the room, not with rage, but with a kind of detached pity. He wasn't a villain anymore. He was just irrelevant, a footnote in her story. Isabella Rossi, 28 years old, stood at the head of the table in the boardroom of the company she now owned. She wasn't just the CEO. Thanks to the valuation of Chimera, which Silas Black's accountants had pegged in the low 10 figures, she was on paper the youngest self-made female billionaire in the nation. She looked out the panoramic window at the sprawling city below. It wasn't his world anymore. It was hers, and she was just getting started. The first 24 hours of Isabella's reign were a masterclass in controlled demolition and strategic reconstruction. The news of the hostile takeover and her appointment as CEO sent shockwaves through the financial industry. The headline in the Wall Street Journal read, "Fired an Analyst 28 buys company, becomes tech's newest billionaire." The story was sensational, but it barely scratched the surface of the silent, swift revolution happening inside the Innovatech tower. Her first act as CEO was to call a company-wide all-hands meeting in the main atrium. The employees gathered a sea of anxious and curious faces. They were expecting a bloodbath. They were expecting a vengeful tyrant. Isabella walked onto the small stage, not with a cohort of lawyers, but alone. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back. She looked young, almost startlingly so, under the harsh corporate lighting. She tapped the microphone, and a hush fell over the crowd. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Isabella Rossi. As of yesterday, I am your new CEO. I know there are a lot of rumors and a lot of fear, so let's dispense with the mystery. Yes, I used to work here as a junior analyst, and yes, I was fired." A murmur went through the crowd. This was unprecedented honesty. "I was fired," she continued, "because I was building something new, something that the old leadership was too afraid or too blind to understand. That something is Project Chimera, and it is the future of this company, our future." She laid out her vision, not with corporate jargon, but with passion and clarity. She spoke of turning Innovatech from a lumbering dinosaur into a sleek, agile fintech predator. She spoke of innovation, of meritocracy, of rewarding talent over tenure. "For years, your ideas have been stifled by bureaucracy. Your talents have been wasted on outdated systems. That ends now," she declared. "I am not here to punish the past. I am here to build the future. If you are passionate, if you are talented, and if you are willing to work harder than you have ever worked before, you have a place here. If you are here to just collect a paycheck and wait for retirement, I suggest you update your resume." Then came the first of her gambits. "Effective immediately," she announced. "I am dissolving the entire senior management layer directly under the CEO. All departmental vice president positions are hereby vacated. Gasps rippled through the atrium. It was a corporate decapitation. In their place, she continued, I will be promoting from within, based on one criterion alone, merit. I've spent the last 3 years watching you work. I know who the real innovators are. I know who the dead weight is. Her eyes scanned the crowd and found a familiar, anxious face. David Chen, where are you? David, her former manager, looked terrified as he hesitantly raised his hand. David, Isabella said, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time. You were the only manager who believed in my work. You protected it as long as you could. You understand what's coming. I'm promoting you to Chief Technology Officer. Your first task is to assemble a team to integrate Chimera into our core systems. You have an unlimited budget. Get it done. David Chen stood frozen for a moment, his face a mask of utter shock before a slow, dawning grin spread across it. A wave of energy of possibility surged through the employees. It wasn't a bloodbath. It was a revolution. Throughout the day, Isabella moved with ruthless efficiency. She walked the floors, not with an entourage, but by herself. She had quiet conversations with coders, with junior traders, with administrative assistants. She remembered their names, their projects. By day's end, a new leadership team was in place, comprised of the company's brightest and most overlooked talents. The old guard, the cronies of Arthur Finch, were gone. Late in the afternoon, her assistant, a sharp young woman she'd promoted from the reception pool, informed her she had a visitor. A Mr. Brendan Cole is in the lobby. He insists on seeing you. He says it's personal. Isabella felt a flicker of something, not anger, but a weary finality. Send him up, she said. Brendan entered her new office. Arthur Finch's old office, now stripped of its heavy dark furniture and replaced with minimalist glass and steel. And he looked like a broken man. His bespoke suit was rumpled. His face was pale and drawn. The swagger was gone, replaced by a desperate, hollowed-out look. Izzy, he began, his voice raspy. I had to see you. I can't believe this. Isabella remained seated behind her vast new desk. She didn't offer him a seat. Brendan, I came to apologize, he said the words, sounding foreign and clumsy in his mouth. What I said, what I did, it was unforgivable. I was a fool. I was arrogant. And I was jealous. Yes, Isabella agreed, her tone neutral. You were. He took a step closer, his eyes pleading. My father is... He's furious. Sterling Wakefield is one of Innovatech's biggest clients. He says I've ruined the relationship. I've been suspended. My career is over, Izzy. He was looking for something. Absolution, pity, a lifeline. He was trying to appeal to the woman. He thought he knew the Izzy who would be swayed by his pain, but that woman was gone. Your career is not my concern, Brendan, she said, her voice as cool and hard as the glass of her desk. You made a series of choices. You chose to belittle me. You chose to sabotage me. You chose to align yourself with a failing system because it was comfortable and familiar. These are the consequences of your choices. Tears welled in his eyes. But we loved each other. Doesn't that mean anything? Isabella leaned forward slightly. You loved the idea of me, Brendan. You loved the version of me that fit into your world. The moment I tried to build my own world, you tried to burn it down. That isn't love. It's possession. She stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. The work I am doing here is going to change the face of finance. I have a company to run. I'm afraid I don't have time for this. She turned and looked out the window at the city stretching out below her. It was a dismissal, more profound and complete than any firing. Defeated Brendan turned and walked out of the office, a ghost from a life she had already left behind. She heard the door click shut. She didn't turn around. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a quiet, clean sense of closure. He was a problem that had been solved. Her phone buzzed. A text from an encrypted number. It was from Silas Black. Geller tells me the old guard has been purged. Good. Now the real work begins. Chimera is hungry. It's time to feed it. Don't get distracted by the noise. Your only loyalty is to the future. Isabella smiled. He was right. The past was settled. The future was a blank page, and she held the pen. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. The passage of 6 months had not just changed Innovatech Financial. It had forged it into an entirely new element on the periodic table of Wall Street. The old sleepy firm was a distant memory, a fossil preserved in amber. The new Innovatech was a place of breathtaking velocity, a symphony of quiet intensity. The open-plan floors, once a landscape of cubicle farms, were now collaborative pods centered around holographic data streams. The currency here wasn't tenure or titles, it was ideas and execution speed. Isabella had fostered a culture that felt less like a bank and more like a mission control center for the future of capital. A perfect example was playing out on the main screen in her office, a vast expanse of transparent aluminum that dominated one wall. It was 3:58 p.m., 2 minutes before the closing bell. Innovatech was in the midst of a silent, high-stakes duel with Goliath National Bank, the oldest and most arrogant titan of the industry, over a massive block of shares in a biotech firm that had just announced a breakthrough. Goliath's traders, using traditional models, were selling short betting. The announcement was a speculative bubble that would pop. Chimera, however, had seen something else. It had cross-referenced the clinical trial data with an obscure materials science journal, noting that the new drug's delivery mechanism relied on a polymer whose sole patent holder had just been quietly acquired by a tech conglomerate. It wasn't just a drug breakthrough, it was a vertically integrated manufacturing pipeline in the making. Chimera hadn't just seen the signal, it had understood the entire ecosystem around it. "They're still shorting," David Chen said, standing beside Isabella. He looked less like a TO and more like an excited kid with the world's best video game. "They think we're insane." "Let them," Isabella said, her eyes fixed on the cascading numbers. "Insanity is just a vision they can't comprehend yet." At precisely 4:10 p.m., the closing bell rang. A moment later, a news alert flashed across the wire. The tech conglomerate confirmed a multi-billion-dollar partnership with the biotech firm. The stock didn't just rise, it went supernova. Goliath National lost an estimated $900 million in a single afternoon. Innovatech, thanks to Chimera's foresight, had netted over $1 billion. It was just another Tuesday. This kind of success had made Isabella Rossi a legend, but it also made her a target. The industry, terrified of what it couldn't understand, began to fight back. Rivals tried to poach her staff with astronomical offers they all refused. Whispers of illegal insider trading circulated, prompting a discreet SEC inquiry that found nothing because there was nothing to find. Chimera wasn't cheating, it was just playing a different game entirely. The most persistent thorn in her side was a man named Nathan Pierce, a Pulitzer-winning journalist for the New York Ledger. Pierce was old-school cynical and smelled a rat. He didn't believe in magic bullets, and he saw Isabella as a financial warlock who needed to be exposed. His weekly columns were a masterclass in insinuation, painting her as a reckless gambler, a stooge for some hidden benefactor, or a fraud whose luck was about to run out. "The rise of Isabella Rossi and Innovatech isn't a fairy tale," he wrote in his latest piece. "It's a black box, and history teaches us that black boxes on Wall Street are never filled with miracles. They are filled with secrets, and those secrets eventually rot the entire system." Isabella read his column on her tablet as she sat in the back of her car, gliding through the city's neon-drenched streets toward her apartment. She should have been angry, but she mostly felt a strange sense of weariness. Pierce, like Brendan, like Finch, was another man trying to fit her into a narrative he understood. They couldn't accept that the phenomenon was simply a brilliant woman and her even more brilliant creation. The cost of this constant battle was her isolation. Her penthouse apartment was a marvel of minimalist design and smart home technology, a sterile paradise with views that could make an emperor weep. But it was also an empty fortress. Her friends from before her meteoric rise struggled to relate to her new reality. Dating was impossible, a minefield of sycophants and gold diggers. Her life had become her work, and her only true confidant was David Chen. It was during one of their late-night work sessions that the next chapter truly began. David had been running a deep learning protocol, allowing Chimera to search for patterns beyond the financial markets. The results he brought to her were staggering and terrifying. "It's not just supply chains, Isabella," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "It's everything. Based on massive atmospheric data, ocean temperatures, and deforestation rates, Chimera is predicting a catastrophic crop failure in Southeast Asia within 18 months, a famine that will affect 50 million people. It's also identified 5 coastal cities that are structurally unprepared for the sea level rise predicted over the next decade. It's mapping the future of human suffering." They stared at the data, at the cold, hard projections of impending disaster. All the money they had made, all the rivals they had crushed, suddenly felt meaningless. They had created a crystal ball, and it was showing them a vision of hell. "We can't just sit on this," Isabella whispered, the weight of the information pressing down on her. "We can't just use this to short agricultural futures. It's monstrous." This was the moment her ambition crystallized into purpose. The power they held wasn't for accumulating wealth, it was a tool for intervention. "We're going to create a new division," she declared, the idea taking shape with electrifying clarity. "A non-profit arm of the company. We'll fund it with 10% of Innovatech's quarterly profits. We're going to build early warning systems and give them to governments for free. We're going to preemptively invest in drought-resistant crops and fund their distribution. We're going to finance the seawalls those cities need before the floods come. We won't just predict the future, we'll protect it." They called it the Atlas Initiative, a name that signified the immense burden they were choosing to lift. The announcement of the Atlas Initiative was met with confusion by the street and cynicism by critics like Nathan Pierce, who dismissed it as a clever PR stunt to deflect regulatory scrutiny. But for Isabella, it was the only thing that mattered. A week later, a simple, unmarked cardboard box arrived at her office. There was no return address. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a single leather-bound first-edition copy of a treatise on modern neural networks, the very book she had packed in her box on that humiliating last day at the old Innovatech. Tucked inside was a note on thick, cream-colored cardstock, the handwriting a strong, angular script. "Isabella, they will always mistake the architect for a gambler. They will always fear the tools they cannot comprehend. I once built a machine to see the future. I used it to win a war, and then I walked away. You have built a machine to save the future. Do not make my mistake. Do not walk away. The world needs its architects." The ghost in the machine is proud. SB. Isabella held the book, the heavy paper of the note cool against her fingers. It was more than an acknowledgement. It was a charge, a warning, and a blessing from the only person on the planet who could truly understand the path she was on. She looked from the book to the flowing data on the screens, then out the window at the city below. The journey had been forged in the fires of betrayal and humiliation. She had been dismissed, underestimated, and cast out. Brendan Cole was a faded memory, a cautionary tale. Arthur Finch and Nathan Pierce were just voices from an old world, their skepticism the dying echo of an obsolete era. Her story had never truly been about revenge. Revenge was a closed loop, a snake eating its own tail. Her story was one of creation, of building something where nothing existed before. She hadn't just bought a company, she had given it a soul. She had built an empire, not of money, but of purpose. And as she stood there, the architect of tomorrow holding a message from the ghost of yesterday, she knew with absolute certainty that her life's work, the cute little hobby that had sparked a revolution, was ready for its grandest, most important task. What an incredible journey of resilience, intelligence, and ultimate triumph. Isabella Rossi's story is a powerful reminder that your worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. Her refusal to be broken, her unwavering belief in her own vision, and her transformation of personal pain into world-changing power is an inspiration to anyone who has ever been underestimated or told their dream was just a hobby. What did you think of Isabella's epic comeback? Was her takeover ruthless or justified? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you found this story as motivating as I did, please give this video a huge thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear that their ambition is valid and their dreams are worth fighting for. And of course, if you want more stories of incredible underdogs who change the game, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thanks for listening.